a CNF, French Citizenship Certificate, Certificat de Nationalité Française, it's only one of the modes of proving that someone is French. If it's one of the modes of proving that someone is French, it's also the strongest one. Once someone is holder of a CNF, no French administration can put its nationality in question without going through judicial procedures, having the burden to prove that this person is not French. So if they fail to prove, you're French. Because a CNF is the strongest proof of citizenship, it is also the hardest to obtain. The French Civil Code expressly says that the burden of proof relies upon the one who wants to prove his quality of French. So if you are launching a CNF application, you will have to prove that all the conditions in a chain of affiliation were met to the transmission have occurred subsequently from one generation to the other. If you fail to provide one evidence, then the application is refused. So, for example, if you fail to provide evidence that your grandmother did not acquire citizenship in the USA prior to the birth of her kid, if you don't prove this negative condition, you're probably receiving a rejection of your CNF application. So you need to prove the positive and the negative conditions of the transmission of citizenship. However, you might be exempted from this need of providing evidence that the nationality was transmitted generation from generation if you prove that you and your immediate parent that in the French bloodline has held possession of status, has been treated as French national. So if you prove these two, you don't need to go back to the generation of your great grandparents, for example. Article 30-2 from the French Civil Code is a hint for those that are applying through an ancestor that lived in France a while ago, if himself and the immediate parent that transmitted French citizenship have been treated as French nationals. If they did so, you're exempted from this need to provide evidence that the great-grandparents transmitted the nationality. You just need to prove this possession of status of these two generations. In the CNF application, in the regular one, where you have to provide evidence of the transmission of citizenship through the generations, you might be attentive to the article 30-3. You remember I mentioned that the principle of transmission is the jus sanguinis, so it's the automatic transmission. Yes, it's applicable in a chain of affiliation. However, when your family has been established outside of France for more than 50 years, you need to prove not only that you come from this chain of affiliation, but you need to prove also that your ancestors either were living in France for the past 50 years, either that your immediate ancestors were treated as French nationals. In the last video, I mentioned that the principle of transmission is the jus sanguinis, so it's the automatic transmission. It is true, however, it has to be nuanced, because after some years living abroad, precisely after 50 years of the establishment of the French family living abroad, one has to prove not only that he or she comes from a French chain of affiliation, but also that the ancestors were not living outside of France for more than 50 years, or that the parent was treated as a French national in the past 50 years. So if your family is established outside of France for longer than 50 years, you have to do special proof of this condition. The CNF application is held in front of the Tribunal Judiciaire by the greffier, so it's the clerk administrative authorities of the tribunal who are gonna see if you reunite the conditions from the documentation you provide to have been granted French nationality at birth. If they decide it's positive, they will grant you a French citizenship certificate and you will be able to apply for French documents and others. If your application for ACNF is rejected based on the 50 years rule, this rejection decision might make you eligible to apply for reinstatement into French citizenship, which is to reacquire citizenship because you are no longer capable of proving this citizenship right now. However, at the time of your birth, you were still within the 50 years deadline to be born into a French family and be granted French automatically. So birth French automatically. However, it's not possible for you anymore to prove this right now, since you failed to provide evidence that your ancestor was living in France less than 50 years ago, or that your immediate parent that transmitted French nationality was treated as a French national by the authorities in the past 50 years. If that's the case, we can help you apply for your reintegration into French citizenship, and we'll make a dedicated video to that.